is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Today is April 9th. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the DDA Provider Implementation Plan and Person-Centered Plan Checklist. With us today is Nick Burton, the CMRO Regional Director, Patricia Sastoque, Director of Programs, Rhonda Workman, Director of Federal Programs, and Ann Mason, Interpreter. Hopefully you can see her on your screen. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to listen to the webinar, and that's by computer and phone. There's two handouts for this webinar, and you can find it in the handout section in the panel to your right, and they can be emailed upon request. We are recording the webinar and we'll post it on the DDA website. Questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel, and we're going to get to those at the end of the presentation. And so now I'd like to introduce Nick Burton. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning. Thanks, Donna. Do you want to go to the next slide? So for the DDA, I just want to welcome all of you to this webinar. Today we're going to jump into the exciting world of provider implementation plans and person-centered plans. We're also going to review some tools, some policy, some templates, and of course we're going to have some time for some questions as well. And as per usual, we'll break for some questions, and then if we don't get to your question, we will certainly make sure that we follow up with an FAQ so that everybody gets their question answered. Next slide. So today we're going to share with you some policies and tools that will support you as an agency as you're engaging with PCP teams to develop robust PCPs for the individuals that you support. Each of you play such a critical role in supporting people with disabilities. The yearly PCP really sets the tone for the amazing work that you and the person do together over the course of the year, and we want to make sure that that amazing work is captured in the PCP and ensuring it fully reflects the person's needs, outcomes, aspiration, goals, and successes. So our hope is that at the end of this hour, you walk away with the right tools and information to just keep doing what all of you do best. So thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Rhonda.
Thank you, Nick. So good morning, everybody. So let's talk a little bit about background for the Provider Implementation Plan. DDA providers have historically created service-specific implementation plans for people that they support, often referred to as a provider implementation plan. These provider implementation plans tends to vary. We've seen different plan templates in terms of scope of information, the details that are within it, and even the length of the plans, with some of them being just a few pages and others being several pages, 30 plus. DDA previously sought input for a standardized provider implementation plan, or PIP, policy and form, so that we could all have a standard tool that we could use and work from. The provider implementation policy and template was created based on this previous input we received. Next slide, please. So the provider implementation plan policy was released on February 26, 2021 of this year. This policy can be found in Policy Stat on the DDA website and applies to participants receiving DDA funded services, whether through our traditional services or self-directed service model. Their legal representatives and family members, staff, coordinators of community services, self-directed staff, the Office of Healthcare Quality, and DDA providers. A provider implementation plan should be developed for applicants and participants enrolled in the traditional service delivery model by the DDA providers, and for applicant and participants enrolled in self-directed service delivery model, the participant, their designated representative or staff, or the selected vendor or provider. And as you know, people self-directed often reach out to DDA providers to seek supports under their self-directed service model. Effective July 1st, 2021, a provider implementation plan must be completed as part of the person-centered planning process for any person-centered plan. That would include initial plans, annual plans, revised plans, and emergency revised plans that have an effective date of July 1st, 2021 or later. DDA providers or applicants and participants self-directing may continue to use their current plans or associated document and forms detailing how they will implement services prior to this policy effective date. Again, the policy becomes effective July 1st, 2021. Providers may begin applying this policy earlier and using the provider implementation plan prior to our policy effective date. The provider implementation plan template form is found in the policy at the end of the policy under the title of attachment heading. Next slide, please. The policy includes specific standards and roles for participants, their authorized representatives, coordinators of community services, and regional office staff. This slide reflects some of the roles for the person and their authorized rep. That includes sharing information about their unique needs, reviewing that plan and with the CCS and the provider, accepting or rejecting that provider implementation plan, reviewing that plan at least annually and more frequently based on changes, and choosing another provider when the current provider no longer meets their needs, maybe because their outcome changes and now they're looking for employment, maybe because progress is not being made, or maybe they're just not happy with those services. So those are the roles and responsibilities of the person and the rep. Next slide, please. The coordinator of community services roles includes coordination with the providers, discussing needs and sharing information with providers such as the goals of the person. Also talking about different service units and frequency, talking about the learning style of the individual, and maybe some environmental engineering or things that could be changed or adapted in the environment to better support the person based on their needs and preferences. The role includes assessments based on the person's needs and preferences, reviewing that provider implementation plan with the person and their representatives, and share requested changes directly with the provider, and uploading that provider implementation plan into LTSS. Next slide, please. So the provider's roles and responsibility include reviewing information related to the participants' outcomes and person-specific preferences, interests, communication, and learning styles, and other tools such as the health risk screening tool, the support intensity scale, a behavior plan, and nursing care plan. They identify appropriate DDA provider staff as applicable for proper discussions with the coordinator community service and participant for that provider implementation plan pre-meeting proposed services for frequency, duration, scope, and plan. It's important to have the right people involved that make those decisions related to the program, services, and supports that will be provided. Providers assess and advise the CCS if the provider is able to provide the services that align with the person's outcome as soon as possible and prior to that person-centered planning meeting. They develop and complete the provider implementation plan using the DDA approved form to document the plan details in accordance with applicable requirements, such as the DDA waiver program, DDA policies, and then also share with the CCS, the participant, and their authorized representative. And providers will revise the provider implementation plan based on the participant and the representative in accordance with changes that are reflected by the individual or their needs and as per Medicaid waiver program, services, and policies. Next slide, please. The provider implementation must document that service delivery implementation strategy for the requested services. Again, it should be focusing on supporting the person's chosen outcome. It should include strategies for goal implementation that are specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant to the person, identified outcomes, and have clear proposed timelines for achievement. These are often referred to as SMART goals. Next slide, please. The provider implementation plan should be created upon receipt of an LTSS service referral to the provider to address a specific outcome that's listed in the person's plan, upon request from a participant self-directing services, and should be completed again effective July 1st using the DDA PIP template form. Participants and providers may include additional information such as their current implementation plans or associated documents as an attachment associated with the DDA provider implementation template form. Remember, that template form would be required effective July 1st. Next slide, please. The services and supports outlined in that provider implementation plan must be consistent with the person's PCP. So looking at those goals, the important to, important for, and risk. Again, they must comply with all applicable requirements governing our waiver program services, such as the waiver program service definitions, requirements, and limitations. Please note that we will not authorize payment for any waiver program service that is not provided in accordance with the applicable requirements. So if there's additional items put in the provider implementation plan that differ from what we can provide under the waiver programs, we will not be able to pay for them. The provider implementation plan policy for the provider implementation plan should be submitted to the person and the representative and the coordinator of community services based on the following. If the person is new to services, so this is your initial referral, they should be completed within 5 business days of that service referral acceptance or sooner. For annual PCPs, again, should be submitted at least 5 business days prior to the participant's scheduled annual PCP planning meeting. For revised PCPs, within 5 business days or team agreed date, anytime a revision to the strategy needs to occur. And for emergency revised plans, it should be submitted within 5 business days of emergency revised plan. Next slide, please. For the provider implementation plan, it should be reviewed and updated as listed in the PCP outcome section and more frequently based on changes to circumstances. We've included a screenshot of the LTSS person-centered plan in terms of the frequency that is noted based on those team discussions with the participant and the provider in terms of when the assessment of those implementation strategies would occur. As you can see in this screenshot, this would be occurring on a monthly basis. The provider implementation should be approved by the person and their authorized representative as applicable. And again, it will be uploaded in the PCP documentation section of LTSS by the coordinator of community services. Next slide, please. That provider implementation plan should be based on what is known about the person. It should be revised based on discovery, again, of what is important to and for the person through those person-centered planning processes and service delivery. And again, it's important to use SMART goals that are developed using this information through these planning and discovery processes any new or additional relevant assessments, the plan itself, and other information that would help to inform you in terms of how to support this person in achieving their goals. Next slide, please. The plan should include enough information so that any direct support staff could step in to assist the person in completing their goals, such as information related to the person's preferred learning style and communication method, specific strategies and learning, such as direct support staff individual actions that need to be completed for success, and descriptions of how integrated supports, such as natural or community supports, would be used to help the person attain their goal. Next slide, please. The plan should include descriptions of staffing levels and types of supports, such as verbal prompting, maybe hand over hand or line of sight. Should talk about the type of activities and how often an opportunity should be given to try or practice it, and for what duration of time. It can reference the nursing care plan and behavior plan strategies to be utilized in circumstances as applicable. Next slide, please. It should include the method of evaluating success, how to determine what's working and what's not working. It should look at the location of service delivery, such as in the community, and if it's in a community environment, meaningful day provider site, or residential if at residential setting, or at home if provided at a non-licensed site. It should exactly match that outcome description statement in the person-centered plan. Next slide, please. The plan should also include general staff positions, such as the DSP, the job coach, nurse, etc., that's responsible for assisting the person with the goals is noted. Note that the staff name is not needed, but really we're looking at the role because we know that will change. This is a screenshot of the actual provider implementation plan form template to show that you would note how and who would be responsible for achieving those goals and measurements. There should be documentation for information so that the person, if they're able, and the direct support staff can understand how to complete that goal. And again, using that required template form effective July 1st. Next slide, please. The activities identified in the provider implementation plan should be taking place in the community setting. And so they should be meeting the community settings rule as set forth in the Code of Federal Regulations and the Medicaid regulations, COMAR 1009-36, or B locations, which are not required to meet the community settings rule at this time, but have a transition plan approved by the DDA, which will result in compliance. Please note that all family supports and community support services must meet the community settings rule requirements. All new services and new service sites approved as of January 2018 must also meet the community settings rule requirements, regardless of waiver program. Next slide, please. Effective July 1st, a PCP cannot be submitted to or reviewed by the DDA unless and until a provider implementation plan is submitted addressing each service associated with a provider. Any delay in submitting a provider implementation plan will result in a delay of a review of that person-centered plan, impacting any authorization of services. The DDA regional office staff shall review those provider implementation plans to ensure it aligns with the person's identified outcomes and the services is within the scope of the waiver program's service definitions, requirements, and limitations as part of the PCP authorization process. The regional office staff will review those provider implementation plans in conjunction with the person-centered plan, ensure that the plan complies with the person's plan and applicable requirements and guidance, and they will send a clarification request to the CCS If the regional office reviewer does not find a provider implementation plan as required, and contact the DDA provider or participant self-directing services when the coordinator of community services reports challenges with obtaining that provider implementation plan. So the provider implementation plan, as we mentioned, after initially being developed, may need to be revised. In the event that a revised plan, goal steps, does not result in a modification of the service request, so we're not changing the service, we're not changing the frequency of the units of those services, then that modification or that revised plan should be shared with the coordinator of community services, who will upload it into the LTSS Maryland client attachment section. No further action will be needed on the PCP because we're not changing the services or the units of frequency. It's just the implementation strategy being updated or revised. The last updated provider implementation plan associated with that person's outcome, whether it's in the PCP documentation section or the client attachment section, is considered active until a new provider implementation plan is submitted in LTSF. Next slide, please. If a revised provider implementation plan results in a modification of the service requested, then what needs to happen is a revised PCP also needs to be completed in addition to the revised provider implementation plan. The coordinator of community services will facilitate a PCP meeting to discuss these revisions needed. And so again, if there's a change in frequency of service delivery, scope of services being provided, maybe a staff ratio such as 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, the service type, or that their goal is change and no longer aligns with the outcome, then a revised PCP is needed and a revised provider implementation plan is needed. Next slide, please. Here is a visual of the provider implementation plan. We have included multiple pages so that a goal could be noted on each page and includes a checkbox to note if additional space is needed and additional details will be provided there. Again, providers can also include additional attachments or previous forms or other documents that you use to be attached to the DDA provider implementation plan template. And we've included a link to the provider implementation policy. And again, the template is at the bottom in the attachment section. Next slide, please.
Hello, this is Nick. I wanted to just go over quickly some top 5 PIP takeaways. So number 1, the DDA PIP form is required for plans with an effective date of July 1 moving forward. And remember, those need to be submitted with the PCP so that the PCP can be reviewed and approved in an efficient, timely fashion. All right, takeaway number 2. The DDA PIP form is an attachment in the DDA PIP policy found on Policy Stat. Takeaway number 3, SMART goals are smart. We want them to be specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. Number 4, the PIP should reflect the needs and outcomes identified in the PCP. And your 5th PIP takeaway is the PIP should include enough information to ensure any of your direct care staff could step in and assist a person in meeting their goals.
Thanks, Nick. I think we're trying to be smart. Everything is smart these days. So thanks for those wonderful takeaways. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that come up in this first session. Rhonda, this is for you. Who initially draws the Provider Implementation Plan, the PIP?
So what I'm understanding the question, who initially drives it? So I think the person-centered plan
Drafts.
is what initially drives it. So the person's outcome, their preferences and interests, what's important to, important for, and their risk is really the driver. The provider completes and develops that based on this information and discussions with the person and the CCS.
Thank you. The next question is, can people retire from goals and outcomes? Sometimes due to health reasons, someone may no longer have a goal to work on.
Absolutely. People's needs will change, and we talked about that. So if that goal or outcome is no longer a priority or a chosen goal for the participant, then that can be changed and updated. Please note that in order to authorize a DDA waiver service or funded service, that service has to be associated with an outcome. The outcomes can change, but we do require an association with an outcome for all funded services.
Could you provide some examples of services that are not they're not covered by DDA?
Can I provide?
So it says, could you please provide examples of services agencies include in the plan that does not are not covered by DDA?
So that's a great question. DDA waiver programs do not include private duty nursing, skilled nursing, so that should not be included in it. For community development services, this services is designed to support people in small groups and interacting with individuals in the community. So any activity or services that does not align with what's allowable within the scope of the waiver services that goes outside the parameters of those would be considered not allowable or not funded.
Thanks, Rhonda. And the other piece that that we have here, this was does each service provider need to submit a PIP, for example, for BSS?
Yes, if you are the provider providing behavior support services, then you should complete a provider implementation plan.
Okay, and I have one more. I think a lot of them are coming up, but I picked 5. So the timeline indicated that for an annual PCP, the PIP should be provided 5 days prior to the annual planning meeting. Is DDA now requiring an annual planning meeting in addition to the annual PCP meeting? If not, how would that affect the timing of when the PIP is due for an annual PCP?
So it's a great question, and maybe we're not articulating it well. For annual planning, we know that there's a lot of pre-planning that's going on. So we're saying that that provider implementation plan should be submitted within 5 days of that planning meeting or sooner, so that the CCS has it. It can be reviewed with the person prior to the meeting, and if any additional changes or discussions are needed, could happen during that planning meeting. So it can be submitted prior and should be being reviewed and updated or revised through those discussions during the PCP pre-planning process for the annual plan.
Okay, and then the last one that I have, and there's a lot popping on here, but so there have been already some issues of PCPs being held up due to a second provider. What happens to a provider's ability to bill if a second provider is not submitting their documents in a timely manner?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, there's multiple strategies that can be utilized to support the continuation of billing for those other providers, to include removing that provider who maybe is being non-compliant, or there's some challenges with them completing the provider implementation plan, and then they would be re-added through a revised PCP. But our goal is, as we go forward, and we know we have some challenges now in our system right now, But as we work together as a team, as a system, as a state, to support people in our service delivery system, we would hope that we are all working to make sure that we are working effectively to create a robust person-centered plan that includes the information and documentation needed so that we can move it through, get it approved, and people can access those services as soon as possible and providers are able to bill. And that's why we're going to talk about the provider checklist, which we think will help this process.
Thanks, Rhonda. Why don't we move on, because there's another about 15 additional questions that came. And if we finish, if we have time, we'll go back to all the initial questions. Would that work for you?
Yep, sounds good. Donna, can we go to the next slide? So let's talk about the provider person-centered plan checklist. So to further support the development of robust person-centered plans, the DDA has created a coordinator community services provider or PCP checklist and a provider PCP checklist. The CCS checklist is a required tool. The provider checklist is an optional tool for providers. Use of these respective checklists will support communication and coordination and ensure that that person-centered plan includes the necessary information to support both federal and state requirements, demonstrate assessed needs for requested services and supports, and supports the person's health and safety needs in order to be processed efficiently and authorized. The checklist tool is not an exhaustive list, but if utilized in conjunction with existing DDA service authorization and providing billing documentation guidance and DDA program, policies, procedures, and guidance, should ensure required documentation and consistent and efficient processing of person-centered plans. Annual PCP discussions and coordination should begin 90 days prior to that annual plan expiration date. Providers should share PCP supporting documents such as the cost detail tool, the detailed service authorization tool, behavior plans and nursing care plans as applicable, timely with the CCS so that they are incorporated into the PCP. You will see on the checklist that we've included some reminders. That includes that all participants will follow the same process with requesting that their services in the person-centered plan. That under our traditional service delivery model, the detailed service authorization tools are required for all PCPs. For providers and services not billed through LTSS, we also require the cost detail tool, which is used to calculate the cost and map LTSS person-centered plan requested services to DDA's legacy services for authorization in PCIS2. That cost detail tool is needed for all PCPs, right? So that's our initial, our revised and annual PCPs to ensure continued PCIS2 service authorization or applicable services, and is particularly important when there are changes made to authorized services that are billed through PCIS2. It's important that the cost detail tool justification tab is required to be completed for any person-centered plan revisions that occur during that annual planning meeting or during the person-centered plan year. The provider implementation plan, effective July 1st, 2021, will be required, as we've talked about previously, and submitted along with that person-centered plan. That PIP should be completed using that DDA template that we've just shared. And revisions would be through modifications and that revised PCP. It's important that the supporting documentation that we're going to be reviewing in a few minutes is also included and shared with that CCS as soon as possible. We also highlight in red that please note that there is a 20-day review process for the regional office to make determinations. Determinations in the sense of approving that PCP or seeking clarification or denying it. And all PCPs must be reviewed and approved prior to the services provided. And lastly, we include a variety of links and policies that you can refer to that'll be shown at the end. Next slide, please. So when you look at the PCP Provider Checklist, the first section you're going to come to, the first two questions relates to whether or not your agency is licensed or certified to provide that service requested. So when completing the provider application for DDA, providers were asked to indicate which waiver program they wanted to provide services. In addition, providers were asked on the application to indicate whether they would support children age 21 and under, adults, or both. So if your agency is approved to support children, you will have the 2T code reflected in ePrep. So it's important when you're looking at services and get a service referral, whether through LTSS or from someone self-directing or outside the LTSS system, to make sure that your agency in the system in ePrep is both licensed and certified and noted in the system and has that 2T code if you're going to be supporting children. Next slide, please. If either the provider or the site that the person prefers is not available because the provider either did not indicate it on their application, has not completed that ePrep process, or due to a system issue, they should proactively follow up with the regional office provider relations staff who can assist you with resolving and exploring resolution. On the screen, we've included the various regional office provider relation contacts for your convenience. Next slide, please. The next section of the PCP checklist includes various documentation for you to review and to indicate whether or not it's applicable or not, and if it was included or shared with the CCS. So based on the person, there are various documentations that can be uploaded and included and support that PCP planning process and the authorization. On the screen, you'll see that we've got the behavior plan, and you want to make sure that the behavior plan is current and it's updated, addressing those risks and restrictions, and sent to the CCS. The nursing care plan, again, is it current? Is it addressing those health-related risks? And is it shared with the CCS? The provider implementation plan is the next section, which we've just reviewed. In addition, for those people who are competitively employed and working and are seeking employment services for ongoing job supports and follow along, the competitive integrated checklist is also required. So we've included a link to the policy that you can refer to that information. There may be other documents, other assessments, reports, or incident trends that would help to demonstrate the assessed need for the participant or update the person-centered plan. Those documents should also be shared with the CCS. The detailed service authorization tool, as we know, is used for those proposed services and units, which is shared with the person and the representative to see if it meets their needs, and then incorporated into the PCP detailed service authorization section by the coordinator of community services. The checklist will ask, is the DSAT completed for the DDA guidance and sent to the CCS? It includes some additional questions related to it, such as for site-based services to ensure that the correct site address and Medicaid site address number is indicated on the DSAT so that the CCS can appropriately select and have that service referral go directly to you. It'll ask if there's a comment in the note box to tell if services are changing or the same. Is there a comment in the note box to indicate if there are any service units differences for specific months? For example, For people in school in non-COVID times, they may need additional hours of supports during the summer or during vacation times or school breaks. So there could be an additional units that are needed during those times that could be reflected in the DSAT note comment. For the cost detail tool, there are also questions related to that on the checklist to help support that. The checklist will ask, is the cost detail tool in collaboration with the DSAT tool under traditional model services completed as per the guidance and utilized for all initial service requests, annual plans, and to request new or changes in services and supports. It's really important to make sure for the cost detail tool that that tab related to justification is completed and has enough information to help support the review and authorization. So we've included those questions here in the checklist. It is important that when you share documents with the CCS, that they are sent via secure email, and the documents should not be password protected, as the DDA will be unable to open them when they're uploaded into LTSS. Next slide, please. As per the DDA, Person-Centered Plan Development and Authorization Guidance, providers will indicate their acceptance of services through the service referral in the provider portal. It is important to have appropriate provider staff actively involved during the person-centered planning process and share those applicable documents, such as the DSAT, so that there are none or minimal questions or corrections needed when that service referral is received through the provider portal. We want to again encourage providers to work with coordinators of community services and carefully review the services and units, as they will calculate differently based on months. Some providers are running into billing issues specific to exceeding authorized hours for personal supports, partially because they are not reviewing what they are accepting or they are not checking LTSS frequently as staff are providing services. As you know, providers have 5 days to accept that service referral, and to ensure that timely and efficient processing, we want to prevent going back and forth with either that time frame expiring or rejecting those services. So we encourage that communication and coordination with the coordinator of community services. The service referral acceptance will then generate the provider signature page in the PCP signature section. Next slide, please. Providers can view additional information about the PCP in the provider portal section. So the remainder of the checklist, which is highlighted with additional areas that you could look at to support a robust, up-to-date, accurate person-centered plan. The view from the provider portal section of the PCP includes various components such as the client information, plan details, the outcomes, the service authorization, signatures, the service plan workflow history, and the provider acceptance workflow history. Beginning in May, providers will also be able to view information related to the PCP risk, restrictions, and also be able to view the LTSS individual record. The individual record includes information related to health professionals, exams and vaccines, emergency and backup plans, education, communication preferences and needs, and staff training requirements. Until viewable, providers are encouraged to work with the CCSs who can provide a PDF of the current LTSS, PCP, and individual record so that they can review and share updates. Again, to support that robust PCP, You can review the different sections noted in the checklist and share the updates with the CCS as applicable. Some of the questions you see is, do you get a good idea of the person and what they want to achieve with their life, preferred communication methods, materials and adaptive equipment, assistive technology that may be needed. And again, the goal here is to not wordsmith the information, but to work together with the CCS to support an accurate, up-to-date, informative PCP and individual record. So sharing information noted under the documentation section will help in terms of having accurate and updated information, as that often reflects in the individual record. Next slide, please. The checklist also includes information related to the rights and restrictions section, as I mentioned, will be viewable for you in May. And so you'll see different information that's reflected either through the individual record. It'll talk about health and safety risk and how they're being addressed. Any restrictions noted that would be reflected in the behavior plan and nursing care plan, and also mitigation strategies. Next slide, please. The service authorization section includes various checklist options related to different types of services. So for our services that are referred to as upper payment limits, some of the questions are, should those services be checked and be available for every month of the year? So let's take behavioral consultation as an example. For that service, you would want to make sure, I'm sorry, not behavioral consultation, assistive technology and such, we'll want to make sure that you're able to access those services throughout the month of each year, unless it's only needed for a specific time frame. There's also information related to the dedicated hours to make sure that those are being met and meeting people's needs. And so some of the questions are looking at the number of people supported in the home, whether shared hours are going to be used, consideration of the provider's business model for overnight supports, and also looking at the specific assessed needs of the person, medical, behavioral, and also their community goals. Meaningful day is listed. And so for those individuals who may need one-to-one or two-to-one supports, there's some questions related to that. In addition, we offered some questions on the checklist for personal supports related to two-to-one staffing needs, and also noted to make sure that you're considering any additional documentation that can help support that assessed need so that we can efficiently review and authorize those services. Next slide, please. And so finally, at the end of the checklist, we offer some guidance, resources, and tools. You'll see the checklist includes various links to existing guidance and tools that are available on the DDA website, including FAQs, the DSAT, the cost detail tool, information related to charting the life course to be reviewed and shared with staff, forms associated with self-direction, our guidance for operating in PCIS2 and LTSS, which includes that service mapping so that you can see the difference between the services and authorization, policy stat, and then at the end, we also added a calculator that can help to indicate hours to 15-minute units. We understand that when you're using the DSAT tool and indicating the number of hours that are needed and proposed, when those hours are reflected in the PCP, that those hours are converted to 15-minute units. And some providers have expressed challenges with trying to decipher the hours to the 15-minute units. So you'll see on the Pcp checklist that we've included the ability to enter whatever number of hours you want, and it will automatically calculate the 15-minute increments so that when you get that service referral through LTSS, you can quickly confirm that it meets the needs that you had identified through the DSAT. Next slide, please.
Okay, so the top 5 PCP checklist takeaways. Number 1, this checklist is not required, but it is highly, highly recommended. Number 2, please ensure that the PCP reflects the right waiver, the right services, the right units. It's really important to be making sure that you're checking those things and that what you're accepting is what you're able to provide in the waiver that you're able to provide it, and that it reflects the services that the person needs. Number 3, ensure supporting documentation such as the behavior plan, the PIP, the DSAT, cost detail. Those are all prepped and ready to go and turned in within that 5-day period. It's really important to make sure that those are ready to go and that they're uploaded and that they're turned in so that we can efficiently review the PCP at the regional office. Number 4, it's really important to make sure that those risks that have been identified have mitigation strategies. We're really taking a look at that. We're wanting to make sure that those health and safety issues are being addressed and that there's mitigation strategies to make sure that those supports are in place so people can be healthy and safe. And number 5, make sure to use that handy hour to 15-minute calculator embedded in the checklist. I know there's a lot of questions about that, so I think that's a pretty handy calculator. And that concludes our top 5 PCP checklist takeaways.
Thank you, Nick. Really appreciate that. So since the last time we asked questions, we had a little over 35 questions and we have about 10 minutes. So let's see what we can do within the time that we have. But I did want to make sure you guys did know that we have an upcoming, can you go to the next slide real quick? Please join us for the April 23rd training. It's going to be specific coordinators of community services and providers on common mistakes, lessons learned, different implementation interpretations. So we just want to make sure there's an opportunity to dialogue and hear what we're seeing and hearing from you all. So here's the link for you to register. The other thing that I wanted to share on the next slide, can you go to the next slide? Well, we also have a survey that we have for reopening, and we would like folks to please go ahead and complete it. It was in the newsletter that we just put out. We should have put the link in here, sorry, I don't see it. But please make sure, oh, that is the link. Thank you, Rhonda. So please check on that, click on that, and it'll bring you right to the link so that you can complete, if it's a parent or a participant, to complete that survey. If you're a case manager or provider, please share it with families and participants. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the questions. So Rhonda, should providers plan to include this form for TY's PCPs, transition youth, person-centered plans, going into the system now?
Yes, we would encourage you to use the provider checklist for everybody.
All right, and so does that then mean that for any new or transfer individuals?
Yes.
Okay. Can we use the exact questions on the template to create an electronic form, or do we also want to be able to pull reports based on the data entered, which will not be possible if we complete the provider PIP form?
We are not, provider agencies can decide if they want to collect information and data related to the PIP form. The DDA is not going to be pulling any of this information into any database.
Okay. The other one is, can all services be listed under the same outcome? For example, for community activities, if it's the same one, can they still be used for the same outcome?
Yes, in LTSF, multiple services can be associated with an outcome.
For self-directed plans, will the team be required to use the PIP form?
Yes, as per the policy, the PIP form would be used for both service delivery models, and under the self-directed service model, the participant would be the one that would be establishing the PIP unless they're working with a vendor or a provider for which then they would seek that from them, but they again would be the person who would be reviewing and approving that, similar to what would be under the traditional model.
Okay. Can providers use their own program implementation if the system generates one for them? Their own database generates one for them, or do I need to use the DDA?
So effective July 1st, 2021, providers will need to use the DDA PIP form. In addition to completing the first page, which kind of gives an overview of information, you could note on there that you are attaching additional information if you'd like to include what your current information is, but we are requiring you to use the DDA PIP form effective July 1st.
Great. So this one, Nick, maybe for you. I see a 20-day period for the regional offices to approve. There are many still 3 to 8 months awaiting for approval. How can we clear this up? And it says PCPs must be approved prior to providing services. I assume this is for a few new clients or ongoing. Can you shed a light on that?
Yeah, you're correct. I've been very open and honest and clear with everybody, and so have we been as a DDA, that there is a backlog of PCPs. We've been clear that we're trying to work through that, and we're doing the best that we can. The majority of that backlog is in the Central Region. And as I mentioned on the Central Regional Provider meeting yesterday, our team has been down half of its reviewers and without a supervisor for most of the year. But despite that, we've continued to make progress on that backlog. If there's an urgent issue, most of you have reached out to me and we work through it. We're getting the PCPs approved as quickly as possible. We have hired some new additional people that are assigned strictly to the backlog. And I myself are reviewing PCPs every single day to keep them moving. So we really appreciate your patience and we really appreciate your understanding as we work through those issues. And if you want to talk about the backlog some more one-on-one, I'm always available. Just shoot me an email and we can talk.
And just to clarify, Nick, I asked you the question, but it was not just intent to your region. So I just want to clarify, because the person who asked the question just said, just to be fair, this is not just Central. So I just want to make sure you knew it. And just on behalf of all the regional directors, they are working on the backlog. And if you have anything specific, please reach out directly to them. Thank you for that clarification to the person who asked the question. So Rhonda, this is for you. Do providers have access to upload documents in the PCP to verify their accuracy?
No, the providers do not have access to LTSS. Providers have access to the provider portal, for which they are able to see the PCP, and as I mentioned, as effective May, the individual record. But by providing that information to the CCS, that would be uploaded within LTSS.
And there are several questions in the chat about the CIS, the HRST, and the CCSs. They wanted to know how can the provider have access to the HRST in the support intensive scale ratings so that they can put together a PCP and their PIP?
That's a great question. And so part of the individual record that is going to be available to you in May will include documents in the individual record that has direct links to the HRST and the CIS.
Great. I know we have just a minute left, but I got like about 7 or 8 questions about where can I find the PIP? How do I get that information? And where is it? So can you, Rhonda, show where we have that? Can you go to that slide again?
Sure. Donna, can you go to, go back to slide 5? So while Donna's going to slide 5, if you go to the DDA website, at the top of the website, the top banner, there will be a link to what's known as Policy Stat. And so when you click on Policy Stat, you have the opportunity to select by different categories. So if you select DDA programs and you look at the list, the Provider Implementation Plan policy will show up. And so that's noted here on the screen. On the left side, there's a table of contents. And so you see where it says attachment there that she's pointing at. If you click on that, that will directly take you to the bottom of the policy, and you will see the Provider Implementation Plan form template. On this slide, on slide 5, you'll see at the bottom we have reference. And if you click on that link, that'll take you over a little bit more, Donna. Go to the middle of the slide. To the right, to the right, to the right and the bottom, right there, yep. That's the direct link to Policy Stat. So if you click on that link, that will take you directly to Policy Stat. You won't have to go to the DDA website, and you can then review the policy.
Thank you, Rhonda, appreciate that. It's a little bit after 11. How much time do we have for this, Rhonda?
I believe it was to 11.
Okay, all right, so there's about 20 additional questions on here. We will drop this into the FAQ and share it. There was additional questions about programs and services, so we'll pull those out too. So I'm gonna turn it over back to you, Rhonda.
Yeah, so again, thank you so much for meeting with us today. And as you know, we've shared in our opening, we hope that this has been informative and helpful. We appreciate the opportunity to share these tools, to talk about the policy that was issued in February, you know, as we prepare for that July 1st implementation, and that we hope that this has been helpful for you, and we look forward to further supporting you. Nick, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just one additional thing, Rhonda, people are asking about, some people got to miss this webinar. We are uploaded into the website either by close of business today or no later than Monday. It's recorded, so you should be able to see it with the handouts.
So thank you, wishing everybody a great weekend.
Thank you.